What drives a killer? Tonight, we open the door to the darkest minds in Britain. Most true crime stories tell you what happened, but today we're going deeper. Inside the minds of Britain's most notorious murderers, understanding not just the crimes, but the terrifying psychology behind them. The control, the obsession, the cold calculations that turned ordinary people into some of the most dangerous predators the United Kingdom has ever seen. This is not a theory. This is real. And once you step inside their heads, you'll never see them the same way again. No one is born a murderer. But for some, the road to killing starts long before the first victim. Research into the minds of serial killers reveals chilling patterns. Many of Britain's most infamous murderers share the same early life wounds, severe childhood trauma, physical abuse, emotional neglect, and exposure to violence. Take Fred West, for example. As a child, he was physically beaten by his father and reportedly exposed to disturbing sexual behavior inside his own home. Those early experiences twisted his view of power, pain, and control. For Fred, violence became a language. Control became survival. Psychologists call this the cycle of abuse. When a child is violated, humiliated, and powerless, some grow up desperately craving control, even if that control turns into domination over others. But it's not always abuse. In some cases, like Harold Shipman, it was a need for godlike power hidden behind the mask of respectability. He was not beaten as a child. Instead, the early loss of his mother to illness may have planted an obsession with controlling life and death itself. Whether it's trauma, loss, or ego, these early cracks in the mind create the perfect storm. A storm that, for some, explodes into murder. When police entered 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester, they uncovered one of the most disturbing crime scenes in British history. Fred and Rose West were not just killers, they were predators who turned their home into a personal torture chamber. But to understand what happened inside that house, we need to look inside their minds. Fred West grew up in a world of chaos. His father allegedly taught him that abuse and control were acceptable. His mother reportedly introduced him to sexual acts at a young age. These experiences wired Fred's brain to connect violence with intimacy, control with pleasure. When Fred met Rose in 1970, their relationship became a deadly partnership. Rose herself had a history of abuse. Her father was a violent man who reportedly molested her. As she grew older, Rose developed traits that psychologists associate with antisocial personality disorder: no empathy, no guilt, no remorse. Together, they fed each other's darkest impulses. Fred was obsessed with domination. Rose craved power and control. Their victims, often young women, were lured into the home, tortured, raped, and killed. Many were buried in the garden or under the floors. For Fred and Rose, murder wasn't about rage. It was about complete control mentally, physically, and sexually. They wanted their victims powerless, dependent, and unable to escape. Psychologists call this coercive control, escalating into sadistic homicide. The thrill came not from the killing itself, but from watching the life drain slowly from their victims, knowing they had full command over another human being. Their reign of terror continued for over 20 years. By the time they were caught, at least 12 victims had been murdered, though many believe the real number may be even higher. When we strip away the brutality, one core element remains inside the mind of most murderers: control. For killers like Fred and Rose West, control wasn't just part of the crime, it was the reason for the crime. In the world of criminal psychology, this is called instrumental violence. Unlike impulsive killings driven by sudden rage, instrumental violence is calculated. Every action serves a purpose: to dominate, to humiliate, and to strip victims of any autonomy. Control gives killers a godlike power over life and death. Every scream silenced, every plea ignored, every breath stolen on their terms. Harold Shipman, Britain's most prolific serial killer, craved control in a different way. As a trusted doctor, he decided who lived and who died. He carefully administered lethal doses of drugs to at least 215 of his patients, though some experts believe the true number may exceed 250. Shipman didn't torture his victims physically. Instead, his control was psychological, calm, clinical, and detached. He played judge, jury, and executioner without ever raising suspicion for years. Control allows killers to feel superior. In their minds, they are not simply taking a life, they are playing with it, manipulating it, extending or ending it as they choose. Whether through sadistic torture or quiet injections, the end goal remains the same: absolute domination over another human being. In the quiet town of Hyde, Greater Manchester, patients trusted Dr. Harold Shipman with their lives. But behind the calm voice, the friendly smile, and the white coat hid one of the deadliest serial killers in modern history. Harold Shipman's early life appeared normal on the surface. Born in 1946, he excelled in school and later attended medical college. But a pivotal moment shaped his twisted relationship with death: the loss of his mother, Vera, when he was 17. She died from lung cancer, and Shipman, who watched doctors administer morphine to ease her pain, may have internalized the idea that he too could control life and death with a simple injection. Psychologists believe this experience planted a dangerous seed: the desire to play God. By the time Shipman established his practice, his victims, mostly elderly women, never suspected danger. He visited them in their homes, administered lethal doses of diamorphine, and left behind death certificates listing natural causes. There was no struggle, no obvious motive. Only the doctor's signature remained. For years, Shipman operated undetected, killing with complete authority. Investigators believe he murdered at least 215 people between 1975 and 1998, though some estimates push the true number closer to 250. What makes Shipman even more chilling is his psychological profile. Unlike sadistic killers driven by rage or sexual fantasy, Shipman's killings were clinical. He felt superior. He decided who deserved to live and who should die. The victims were simply numbers, pieces of a puzzle where he held every piece. Even after his arrest, Shipman never showed remorse. He denied responsibility until his suicide in prison in 2004, taking with him many unanswered questions. One of the most disturbing truths about murderers is not what they do, but how easily they blend in. They walk among us. They shake hands, they smile. They live behind closed doors, hiding unimaginable horrors under a mask of complete normality. Fred and Rose West lived on a quiet street. Neighbors saw nothing unusual. They were parents, landlords, members of the community. No one imagined that beneath their house, bodies were buried. Harold Shipman was trusted by hundreds of patients. He attended funerals. He comforted grieving families of people he had secretly killed. To his colleagues, he was a respected doctor, running a successful practice for decades. This ability to mask evil is one of the key traits of psychopathy. According to the Hare Psychopathy Checklist, many serial killers score high on traits like superficial charm, grandiose sense of self-worth, pathological lying, lack of empathy or guilt, but they don't appear dangerous, not at first. Dennis Nilsen, another British serial killer, worked as a civil servant. He owned a dog, had friends, and seemed mild-mannered. But inside his North London flat, he murdered at least 15 young men, storing their bodies in his apartment for months. These killers understood one thing. To succeed, they had to wear the perfect disguise normality. And the better they played that role, the longer they could continue their crimes undetected. In North London, inside a small flat on Cranley Gardens, police discovered one of the most chilling cases in British history. Dennis Nilsen had killed at least 15 men between 1978 and 1983. But what set Nilsen apart was not just the murders, it was what happened after. Dennis Nilsen was not driven by rage or revenge. He was driven by loneliness. Unlike other serial killers, Nilsen didn't want to dominate or torture his victims. He wanted them to stay. Nilsen lured young men, often homeless or vulnerable, back to his home. After killing them, usually by strangulation or drowning, he kept their bodies for days, sometimes even weeks. He would bathe them, dress them, talk to them as if they were still alive. Psychologists call this behavior necrophilic possession, not necessarily sexual, but an obsessive need to control and keep the victim present. In Nilsen's mind, death was not separation. It was a way to freeze the moment, to never be abandoned. Dennis Nilsen grew up isolated. His parents divorced when he was young, and he struggled with his identity and relationships. As an adult, he feared rejection and emotional loss. Killing became his twisted way of creating permanent companionship. The horror finally unraveled when neighbors complained of blocked drains. Inside those pipes were human remains. Police later found dismembered bodies hidden in wardrobes, under floorboards, and in suitcases. During interviews, Nilsen spoke calmly, almost coldly, about the killings. He showed little emotion, no anger, no sorrow. Only a disturbing detachment, as though he never fully grasped the weight of his crimes. Dennis Nilsen was sentenced to life in prison and died in 2018. To the very end, he never expressed true remorse. Every murderer's mind carries a fuse. And for some, that fuse burns for years before it finally ignites. Understanding what triggers a killer separates ordinary criminal acts from the cold calculation of serial murder. For Fred and Rose West, the trigger was the combination of mutual dysfunction. Both had suffered abuse. Both had dark desires. But it was their union, two damaged minds feeding each other, that unleashed their killing spree. Once they discovered shared fantasies of domination and cruelty, murder became their twisted form of bonding. For Harold Shipman, the trigger may have come long before his first victim. Watching his mother die while receiving morphine planted the idea that death could be controlled, clean, easy, and final. Later, as a respected doctor, the temptation to control life and death was no longer theoretical. He had the access, the drugs, the authority. And eventually, he crossed the invisible line. For Dennis Nilsen, it was the unbearable fear of loneliness. His inability to maintain healthy relationships drove him into deeper isolation. Every failed interaction, every rejection, pushed him closer to the edge, until finally he made the decision to kill not out of rage, but out of a desperate need to keep someone by his side. Criminologists call this point the activation stage. It's the moment when fantasy collides with reality. Once that barrier is broken, once the first life is taken, the act becomes easier. For many killers, the first victim is the most difficult. The rest, tragically, follow with terrifying ease. The most terrifying truth is not just what these killers did, but how long they were able to do it while hiding in plain sight. Neighbors passed Fred and Rose West's house for years, never imagining the horror hidden beneath the floorboards. Parents trusted Harold Shipman to care for their loved ones, never suspecting that he was secretly ending their lives. Friends and coworkers saw Dennis Nilsen as quiet, maybe strange but harmless. Nobody saw a killer. How does this happen? Psychologists and criminologists point to one word: normalization. Many serial killers excel at appearing ordinary. They study people. They learn how to behave, what to say, and how to blend into society's expectations. This ability to mimic normal behavior allows them to build careers, relationships, and reputations while hiding their dark obsessions. There's also another factor: cognitive bias. People tend to trust those in positions of authority or familiarity. Doctors like Shipman hold automatic trust. Friendly neighbors like the Wests seem incapable of evil. Colleagues like Nilsen are dismissed as simply private or eccentric. In Britain, an additional cultural layer plays a role: the privacy barrier. Many in British society are reluctant to interfere in others' personal affairs, even when something feels off. Politeness often overrides suspicion. And when victims are vulnerable young runaways, the elderly, the isolated, their disappearances are too often dismissed or overlooked. Opportunities to intervene are missed, and by the time the pattern becomes undeniable, multiple lives have already been lost. When we study the minds of Fred and Rose West, Harold Shipman, and Dennis Nilsen, one brutal reality becomes clear. Monsters don't look like monsters. They live next door. They sit across the table. They build careers. They fool everyone until it's too late. The terrifying part isn't just what they did. It's how easily they hid who they were. The human brain is capable of incredible darkness when mixed with trauma, obsession, or the simple desire for power. And once the line is crossed, once the first victim falls, many never stop. Psychology gives us the tools to understand these minds, not to excuse them, but to recognize the warning signs: lack of empathy, obsession with control, complete absence of guilt. Every one of these killers was once a child. Some were victims themselves. But the choices they made, the acts they committed, were conscious decisions over and over again. The uncomfortable truth is that evil doesn't always announce itself. It often whispers, and it hides behind smiles, handshakes, and ordinary lives. Understanding their minds may not change what they did, but it might help stop the next one before they start.